For 178 years, this company survived everything the world could throw at it. It survived 2 world wars. It survived the Great Depression. It survived the invention of the aeroplane, the collapse of empires, and the arrival of the internet. It had carried the British Army up the Nile. It had organized the Olympic Games. It had sold holidays to kings, to soldiers, and to ordinary working families who had never left their own town before. And then, in the space of a single night, it was simply gone. At 2 o'clock in the morning on the 23rd of September, 2019, the phones went dead. The websites went dark. And around the world, 600,000 people woke up in hotels that no longer had anyone to fly them home. The oldest travel company on Earth had not been beaten by a rival. It had not been destroyed by a war. It had been killed by something far quieter and far more patient. This is the story of how the company that invented the modern holiday ran out of time. It began, of all places, as a way to keep men out of the pub. In the summer of 1841, England was a country being rebuilt by steam. New railway lines were being laid across the countryside, faster than anyone could map them. In the town of Leicester lived a man named Thomas Cook. He was a cabinet maker and a Baptist preacher, and above all, he was a passionate campaigner against alcohol. Cook believed that drink was destroying the working class, and he had an idea. What if he could give working men somewhere to go that was not the tavern? On the 5th of July, 1841, Thomas Cook rented a train. He gathered around 500 supporters of the temperance movement and carried them from Leicester to the nearby town of Loughborough and back. The price was 1 shilling, and it included a simple meal along the way. It was a modest day out for a sober cause. But without knowing it, Thomas Cook had just done something no one had ever done before. He had packaged travel. He had taken the train, the ticket, the food, and the plan, and sold them together as one single, effortless product. And he had taken all the fear and all the arrangements onto himself. For an ordinary working family, a holiday had always been something that happened to other people. The rich traveled, everyone else stayed put. Thomas Cook broke that rule. He made the world reachable for people who had never dreamed of leaving their own county. It is widely remembered as the world's first package tour. Tourism, as we know it, had just been born in a fight against beer. The day trip was only the beginning. People wanted more, and Thomas Cook gave it to them. In 1851, he moved vast crowds to the Great Exhibition in London. By 1855, he was running tours across Europe. In 1866, he took British travelers across the Atlantic to the United States, guiding them past the battlefields of the Civil War. Then his son, John Mason Cook, joined the business, and the son turned his father's moral crusade into a global machine. In 1871, the firm became Thomas Cook & Son. In September 1872, they sent the first escorted tour all the way around the world. Steamship across the Atlantic, stagecoach across America, paddle steamer to Japan, overland across China and India. By 1888, the company had offices on almost every continent, including 3 in Australia. In 1890 alone, it sold more than 3.25 million tickets. In Egypt, John Mason Cook controlled so much of the tourist trade that he was called the second greatest man in the country. When Britain sent an army to rescue General Gordon at Khartoum, it was Thomas Cook & Son who moved the soldiers up the Nile. A firm that had started with 1 train and a bag of sandwiches was now moving armies. This was no longer a business, it was an institution. What made Thomas Cook so powerful was not just the tours, it was that the company quietly invented the tools that made travel simple. In an age before anyone trusted a stranger in a foreign city, Cook created the hotel coupon. A traveler could carry a little booklet of detachable vouchers, and each one could be exchanged for a meal or a night's stay at an approved hotel. No haggling, no fear, just hand over the coupon. A few years later, Cook introduced circular notes, an early version of the traveler's check, so that a tourist could carry money safely across borders long before American Express made the idea famous. Thomas Cook had made the terrifying act of leaving home feel safe, and that trust was almost impossible to kill. The company was sold, and sold again. Cook's own grandsons sold the family firm in 1928 to the operators of the Orient Express. It was seized in wartime as enemy property. In 1948, it was even nationalized by the British government, along with the railways, and run by the state for more than 20 years before being sold back to private owners. Through all of it, the name survived. 2 world wars could not erase it. The Great Depression could not erase it. For more than a century, Thomas Cook was simply a fact of life, as permanent as the railways themselves. Which is exactly why what happened next is so hard to believe. Every empire has a single decision where the ending truly begins. For Thomas Cook, that decision came in 2007. By then, the old British firm had drifted into German ownership and back again, and its managers were hungry to build something enormous. So they agreed to merge with a rival called MyTravel Group. On paper, it looked like a masterstroke. Combine 2 giants, cut £75 million a year in costs, and dominate the European holiday market. There was just one problem, and it was a serious one. MyTravel had made a profit only once in the previous 6 years. Thomas Cook was not merging with a champion. It was chaining itself to a company that could barely make money. The new business, Thomas Cook Group, was born in June 2007, carrying a mountain of debt from the day it opened, and that debt never went away. In 2011, it nearly finished the company off. A debt burden of around £1.1 billion pushed Thomas Cook to the edge, and only an emergency rescue from its banks kept the lights on. But a rescue is not a cure. The debt stayed, and from that point on, from 2011 onward, the company would pay out £1.2 billion in interest alone, not to grow, not to improve, just to stand still. While Thomas Cook was drowning in interest payments, the world it had built was quietly disappearing beneath it. For 150 years, the company's genius had been to take away fear, to do the planning for you. But now, a new generation of travelers did not want that anymore. They had the internet. Anyone with a laptop could compare flights, book a hotel, and build their own holiday in an evening, for less than an agent would charge. Budget airlines like EasyJet and Jet2 sold cheap seats directly to the public. Websites like Airbnb let people rent a stranger's spare room in a click. The travel agent, the very thing Thomas Cook had invented, was becoming a relic. By 2018, 64% of the company's own bookings were being made online, and its high street shops were turning into expensive, half-empty museums. And then the outside world piled on. A heat wave swept Europe in 2018, and millions of holidaymakers simply stayed home in their own gardens. Brexit weakened the pound and made every foreign trip more expensive, while the uncertainty made people nervous to book at all. The company that had spent a century removing risk from travel was now surrounded by risk it could not remove. Every wave that hit the industry hit Thomas Cook hardest, because Thomas Cook was the one already underwater. By 2019, the numbers had become a nightmare. In May, Thomas Cook reported a loss of £1.5 billion for just half a year. Its debt had climbed to around £1.7 billion. To understand how hopeless that was, consider this. The company now had to sell roughly 3 million holidays every single year just to cover the interest on its debt. It had become the most shorted company on the London Stock Exchange, which means more investors were betting on its death than on its survival. A rescue was assembled. The Chinese conglomerate Fosun, owner of Club Med, agreed to lead a £900 million package to keep the company alive. It was almost enough. And then, at the very last moment, the banks demanded more. They wanted an extra £200 million set aside, a cushion to survive the quiet winter months. Thomas Cook turned to the British government and asked it to fill the gap. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, said no, there would be no bailout. On the night of the 22nd of September, the final talks failed, and around midnight, at airports across Britain, ground crews began seizing Thomas Cook aeroplanes over unpaid fees. Shortly after 2 in the morning on the 23rd of September, the Civil Aviation Authority confirmed it. Thomas Cook had ceased trading with immediate effect. 178 years ended in the dark, while most of the country was asleep. When the sun came up, the true scale of it became clear. 600,000 Thomas Cook customers were stranded abroad, 150,000 of them British, sitting in hotels with no flight home. 21,000 people had lost their jobs overnight, 9,000 of them in the United Kingdom. The British government, the same government that had refused a £200 million loan, now had to launch the largest peacetime repatriation in the country's history. They called it Operation Matterhorn. Over the following 2 weeks, the Civil Aviation Authority chartered around 40 aircraft from rival airlines, EasyJet, Virgin Atlantic, even a giant double-decker jet from Malaysia Airlines, to fly stranded holidaymakers home for free. And then came the detail that made people furious. In the 5 years before the collapse, while the debt mountain grew and the company slowly sank, its senior executives had been paid around £20 million in pay and bonuses. The chief executive alone had taken a bonus of £750,000 in a single year. Members of Parliament accused the bosses of being rewarded for failure. The men at the top had done well right up until the end. It was the workers behind the counter and the families on holiday who were left to pay the price. So how does a company survive for 178 years and then die in a single night? The answer is that it did not die suddenly at all. The collapse looked like an explosion, but it was really the end of a slow leak that had been running for more than a decade. Thomas Cook did not fail because people stopped traveling. More people were flying abroad than at any point in human history. It failed for 2 reasons that fed on each other. First, it took on a crushing load of debt in a single bad merger, and then spent years paying interest instead of changing. Second, it kept selling the one thing the world no longer needed: a middleman, in an age when everyone could plan their own trip on a phone. Debt takes away your future because every pound you earn is already promised to someone else. And when you cannot invest in your future, you cannot adapt. And when you cannot adapt, the world does not wait for you. The most dangerous thing about Thomas Cook's ending is how ordinary the cause was. No fraud, no scandal at the core. Just a great old company that owed too much, changed too slowly, and ran out of road. There is a bitter symmetry to it, too. Thomas Cook was born because one man took all the risk and all the planning onto his own shoulders, so that ordinary people would not have to. It died because ordinary people, armed with a phone, no longer needed anyone to carry that weight for them. The company outlived its own idea. Age is not armor. Being loved is not the same as being needed. And no name, however famous, is ever too old to fall. Thomas Cook spent a century teaching the world that travel did not have to be frightening. In the end, it could not save itself from something far more frightening than any foreign country: a balance sheet. If you want to keep watching great institutions rise, rule, and fall, this is the channel for it. Subscribe and tell me in the comments. When a company is this old and this loved, should the government step in to save it, or should it be allowed to fall? I read every reply, and there are many more empires still waiting to be toppled.